Hello, welcome to the second part of this week, lecture-wise. I'm going to be talking, hopefully quickly, but these things can sometimes drag on, about problems for consequentialism and utilitarianism in general. So, first, first of all, this lecture is brought to you by Joey the dog. Let's see, there he is. What a good boy. All right, so again, remember utilitarianism, we had at least two forms. Consequentialism says that actions, or really, all that matters, morally speaking, are the consequences of your actions. Utilitarianism says that happiness is the thing that ought to be pursued, the thing that's most valuable. And so we ought to try and maximize happiness. And so actions that are right are the ones that produce the most happiness, and actions that are wrong are the ones that produce less than the most happiness. Now, initial issue, you might think, well, wait a minute, that can't be totally right, can it? I'm trying to be a good person most of the time. I try to do the right thing most of the time, but it's very unlikely that I maximize happiness, like that I do the thing that actually creates the most happiness in the world all the time. It seems absurd to think that I'm being immoral simply because I didn't do the thing that would create the most happiness in the world. I mean, what if, I want to be a little bit selfish sometimes? It doesn't make me an immoral person. It doesn't make me, doesn't mean that I'm I'm bad. Ultimately, if that's kind of a way that you're thinking at all, then it might seem to you like utilitarianism is missing something about morality. That is, on the surface, there's certain things that utilitarianism doesn't give consideration to that we might think about or matter morally, like whether, your opinions and what it is that you want, your desires, your intentions, and your character. So it might be that utilitarianism and consequentialism in general aren't fully adequate moral theories, because it might be the case that there are other things than merely happiness that matter, morally speaking. It might also just be that the moral goodness of the consequences of actions isn't the only thing that matters, morally speaking, because it might be that whether or not an action is good or bad is determined partly on the basis of whether or not the intentions behind the action taken by the agent are good or bad in the first place, right? The morality of the situation might depend on the intentions behind the situation. Here, we can enter sort of into thinking about the trolley problem. So the trolley problem is a classic sort of case study in philosophy that pits a utilitarian and a deontological approach to ethical thinking against each other. And so it's, a really interesting case, and I'm not going to explain it to you. What I'm going to ask you to do is go stop this video right now and watch this YouTube video that is on the Canvas page. So stop the YouTube video, stop this YouTube video, watch the one on Canvas page. Hopefully you've done that by now. Great. All right. So in the trolley problem, we've got, the one case where you're pulling the lever, and you're saving the 5 people and one person ends up dying. But in the other case, you are standing next to the fat man and you have to, and you're pushing him over the ledge to stop the trolley. Again, killing 1 to save 5. Now, I'm guessing, this is, because we can't actually poll you right now, that you feel the same way that most people do, which is that in the case in which you're given the decision to pull the lever or not pull the lever, if you pull the lever, it'll save the 5 and 1 will die. You would think, yeah, of course, I'd pull the lever. It'll save 5 people, right? one is less than five is better than one, saving five lives is better than one life. But I'm guessing you also feel like you wouldn't think it's right, or you wouldn't be able to do it, to push the fat man off the bridge, thereby killing him and saving the five. Most people feel this way. And as it turns out, I mean, if the consequences are really all that matters, then morally speaking, you should push the fat man. And because there's no morally relevant difference between the cases, right? In the one case, you do something that causes one person to die and saves five lives, right? There's a difference in the causal structure of like how the one person dies and how the five survive. But because the consequences ultimately of the action are the same, there's no moral difference, according to consequentialism and utilitarianism. But so like, suppose that you can't accept that conclusion, right? Suppose that you're like, no, okay, that's just wrong. Clearly, it's different to push the fat man, right? Clearly, there's a moral difference in the case in which you are like, actively doing something to cause someone's death in pushing the fat man to save the five people's lives, versus standing there sort of on the side, just pulling the lever, and oh bummer, there's somebody that's gonna die down the tracks. I wish that didn't have to happen. Well, so there's got to be something morally relevant that's different, or a difference that's morally relevant between the cases. So what could it be? The answer, I think, is this distinction between doing and allowing. And this distinction also, will get us to this other thing called the Doctrine effect, which I'll talk about in a minute. So doing, what is it to do something? Well, to do is an action, and it's to be, at least in this case, right, the doing here is being the central cause of a harm that occurs, right, the pushing of the fat man. Whereas allowing involves sort of merely knowing of a harm that could occur, and allowing harm is not interfering, or maybe not stopping the harm from occurring. In a way, the pulling of the lever is closer to an allowing, but it is sort of still a doing. The doing harm, though, does seem morally worse than allowing harm. And clearly, it seems like something like pushing a fat man is morally worse. You're literally killing him, versus pulling a lever that leads to someone's death. If it's true that doing is morally worse, then, and we hold fixed that the harm that occurs, then consequentialism is false, right? That is, if it's true that doings versus allowings are more like morally important, that is, like, if there's something morally worse about doing harm than allowing harm, but the consequences of the action, in the doing versus the allowing, are exactly the same, then consequentialism's got to be false. Because if the consequences are the same, but there's something different between the doing versus the allowing, then something morally different, then consequentialism says that the only thing that morally matters is the consequences. So there's that's got to be wrong. Here's the doctrine of double effect that's sort of interestingly related and maybe helpful for you to think about. The doctrine of double effect says, look, intentions matter when it comes to morality. And if intentions matter when it comes to morality, consequentialism is wrong. Here's two cases: the tactical bomber and the terrorist bomber. So the tactical bomber. Okay, so imagine a scenario in which you've got a munitions factory, a weapons factory that's making weapons, and that weapons factory happens to be right next to a children's, elementary school. Now we've got two cases, right? There's a war going on between country A and country B. Country A, the weapons factory is in country B, and country A wants to end the war. Country A sends a tactical bomber, an airline or a bombing plane to fly over Country B and bomb the munitions factory, thereby, ending the war sooner. However, they know that if they bomb the munitions factory, that there's a good chance that they're going to, that there's going to be casualties amongst the children that are at the elementary school. So they bomb the munitions factory knowing that it's possible that there will be children that will die in the elementary school. This is the doing here is the actually bombing the factory, the weapons factory. The allowing here is allowing the children at the elementary school to die. And so the idea here is the intention, insofar as there's an intention, the intention is not to kill the children. It is merely to destroy the factory, where the killing of the children is a side product, a byproduct that is unintended. All right. Second case, terrorist bomber. Same exact case, except there's a terrorist bomber that goes to blow up the munitions factory, right, from Country A. He goes from Country A to Country B. He goes and plants a bomb in the munitions factory to blow it up. However, instead of just the case where, instead of not intending to blow up the school, he's actually picked this weapons factory because it is next to the school, and because he knows that it will create mass casualties in the school. And because of that, he's chosen this because he knows it's going to create a bunch of terror in a bunch of other people. So he's doing this on purpose. He wants the children to die. He is trying to blow up both the munitions factory and the children. All right. Now, the idea here is we're assuming that in both cases, the exact same thing happens, right? A bomb drops on the munitions factory, it blows up, and it kills a bunch of children. In the one case, there's an intention there's an intention to blow up the factory, but they don't intend to kill the children. In the other case, there's an intention to blow up the factory and an intention to cause terror by killing the children. Now, there's a distinction here that's on the side that we need to be careful about between doing right and doing wrong, and being praiseworthy or being blameworthy. Now, it might be the case that, the person that drops the bomb from the airplane does just as much wrong as the terrorist bomber, but they are not as blameworthy as the terrorist bomber. That is, it might be that there's a difference between praiseworthiness and blameworthiness, and whether or not you did the right thing or wrong thing. Because sometimes, you can you have to act in certain ways that have bad consequences, but because, you tried to minimize the consequences, you aren't as blameworthy for the action that you undertook. But this is just to sort of caveat the fact that it's possible that these two cases could come apart. So we should hold off thinking about whether or not these people are praiseworthy or blameworthy, and just think about whether or not the actions that they committed are right or wrong. All right. So the issue here is supposed to be this. If you think that what the terrorist bomber did was worse in any way than what the tactical bomber did, then you disagree with utilitarianism. You disagree with consequentialism in general, because on that view, it has to be the case that if the consequences are the same, the morality is the same in both cases. That is, each case is equally morally problematic. But if you do think that the terrorist bomber somehow has done something worse, that is, committed an act that has, that is in general a worse act than the tactical bomber, then you have to think that intentions matter to morality, because the terrorist bomber's intentions are relevant here. If they are relevant here to the morality of the situation, then intentions matter too. So it's not just the consequences that matter to morality. All right. Next objection. The next objection to utilitarianism is hedonism. Is the problems with hedonism. So remember, hedonism is the view that happiness just is pleasure. That is when we're trying to maximize happiness, what we're trying to do is maximize pleasure, maximize the pleasures that people feel, and we can also accept the John Stuart Mill definition of pleasure that I talked about last time, where the idea is that pleasure isn't just sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It can be much more complicated things like winning a game of chess, being educated, having a really fancy meal, having a satisfying job, being satisfied and having a family, so on and so forth. Now, if happiness is pleasure and we're utilitarians, then we get this hedonic decision procedure. That is, like, when we're trying to decide what we should do, morally speaking, we should decide this way. We should do whatever will bring about the most pleasure. So we've got this principle that we should follow according to these two views, utilitarianism combined with hedonism. Is there a problem here? Well, yes. The problem is the experience machine. Here's an experience machine. So let me explain what the experience machine is first. Imagine you could get into a machine that would allow you to live basically your life as you're living it now, but as like a Matrix style, like, CGI. You're basically, you'd be living in a video game that looked as real as possible. And the only difference between living in the video game world versus living your actual life, you're living the video game world in the machine, is that in the machine, everything that you do is going to cause you a lot of pleasure. Like, in a certain way, like, it's just nothing bad's going to happen to you. All the things that you do in your life are going to be really great. You're going to be really successful. You're going to have a great family, right? All of the stuff that you want to have in your life is going to happen, and it's going to be fantastic. The only difference is that it's going to be in an experience machine. So in a certain sense, it's all going to be an illusion. We can sort of fix the case so that, once you're in the experience machine, you don't know you're in the experience machine, and you can't get out of the experience machine. Now, why do we set it up this way? Well, the idea is this: if you're supposed to do whatever will bring about the most pleasure for yourself and for others, then what you ought to do, given the possibility of the existence of one of these experience machines, what you ought to do is get in the machine and try to get as many people in the machines as possible. Like, you should be trying to make these machines for everyone so that everybody can get in these machines, so that everybody can experience the best possible lives that they could possibly have. Right? I mean, I can just stipulate this here too, right? Because this is my example. I'm just going to stipulate in this example that life inside the experience machine is extremely pleasurable, more pleasurable than you could possibly live a life outside of the experience machine. We'll just fix it. Like, in the experience machine, when in order to, you just don't have to go through any misery. You want to get a six-pack, you can do some sit-ups, but it doesn't hurt you to do sit-ups, and then you'll get a six-pack, right? You want to become good at, I don't know, something difficult, tennis. Well, you'll get good at tennis, and you'll miss out on all of the parts that are hard in getting good at the thing, right? Like, it'll be pleasurable the whole way through. That's the basic idea. Now, if you ask people, would they get into this experience machine? Few people say that they'll get into the machine. And there's this guy, Nozick, who sort of postulated this experience machine. And he thinks that this shows that there must be something other than pleasure that people value. And if so, if there's something other than pleasure that people value, then hedonism is wrong. It's not the case that what you ought to do is only determined by what is going to cause the most pleasure for the most people. The thought here, I think, is something like this. There's value to the authenticity of our interactions with people. There's value to knowing that we're, in a certain sense, in the real world. If you or I found out tomorrow that we were living in the Matrix, we might get angry at the, machine overlords that had put us there because they precluded us from living an authentic existence, a real life out in the real world, facing the real issues of the time, of the day, by putting us in this sort of illusion land. If it's possible to value authenticity like this, and authenticity really does matter, that is, it matters sort of on par in some sense with pleasure or happiness, then hedonism has got to be wrong. It can't be that pleasure itself is all that matters. It looks like, at least from the experience machine example, not just pleasure matters. Pleasure matters for sure, but also maybe authenticity of experience, like being really around and really able to interact with your family, friends, really do things in the real world where things are actually difficult and actual experiences come, and challenges come and need to be overcome. All right, next problem. There's a lot of problems with Act Utilitarianism. Remember, Act Utilitarianism is the version of utilitarianism that says an action is right if and only if it maximizes happiness, and anything else is wrong, right? Every other action, if it doesn't maximize happiness, it's morally speaking wrong. It's less than morally right. This is distinct from indirect utilitarianism that says to act in ways that tend to promote happiness rather than, maximize happiness. So Act Utilitarianism seems to conflict with basic justice and violates the, you can violate basic human rights on Act Utilitarian principles. And there are two classic cases that show this: the hospital case and the angry mob case. The hospital case is the classic case that you may have heard of already. Basically, it's this. Imagine you have a relatively healthy person go into a hospital. They've got the sniffles and they need, some aspirin. And then you've got 5 very unhealthy people that are in need of organ transplants at the hospital. Luckily, they all need different organs. Also, as it just so happens, the one healthy person is a match for the 5 unhealthy people. And the healthy person just so happens to have, all the organs match for what the unhealthy people need. Now, according to Act Utilitarianism, if you're a doctor in this hospital and you are trying to maximize happiness, well, what you ought to do, according to Act Utilitarianism, is to take this healthy person and harvest their organs and transplant them into the 5 sick people and send them on their way, thereby killing one person and saving 5. 5 times the happiness is better than 1 times the happiness, and so there it goes. You've maximized happiness. Well, that seems and sounds absolutely bonkers, right? I mean, utilitarianism, if utilitarianism condones basically the violation of someone's basic human rights to their own body, it seems like it's got morality wrong, right? We don't think that doctors morally ought to harvest healthy people's organs in order to save sick people. right? No, we think that doctors, in fact, ought not do that. We think that doctors ought to respect the bodily autonomy of individuals. That is, people's right to be free with their own bodies and do with them as they will. And, we shouldn't be going around killing people in order to, try and save, killing individuals in order to save other individuals, even if we can, kill just a few to save a lot. Now, I'm not 100% sure about, thinking back to the trolley case. It seems to me that you ought to pull the lever and save the 5 and accidentally, even if it kills the 1. But some people do think that that's even that is problematic, because you're putting yourself in place in a place where you are, in a sense, changing the outcomes of how things are going to be, and thereby causing one person's death. I think it's wrong to push the fat man. I don't think that you should push the fat man in order to save the 5 people. But I mean, it's still also morally problematic to allow 5 people to die. Here's something, though, that I think is true. When it comes to utilitarianism, if you ramp up the number of people that you can save by killing one person, then it really does start to seem like you ought to kill that one person in order to save the people, right? So imagine there's a nuclear bomb. I don't know. Maybe you've seen the Saw movies. They're really atrocious. I mean, the stuff that people have to do is really horrible. Imagine there's a nuclear bomb in the middle of Los Angeles, right? And it's going to go off. And the only way for you to stop the nuclear bomb is to kill the person that's strapped to the nuclear bomb, right? Like this horrifying, bad guy has strapped an innocent bystander to the nuclear bomb, and the only way that you could possibly, cut the wire to the nuclear bomb is to go through this person somehow, thereby killing them. Well, in that case, it sounds horrible to have to kill someone to save millions, but if you have the ability to kill one person in order to save millions, I think maybe you should. I mean, this is why morality gets hard here, right? It gets really hard, and it's difficult to think about all the ins and outs of the issues, but this is one of those cases. All right. Another problem with utilitarianism, the angry mob case. The angry mob case goes like this. Imagine you are a sheriff in a small town, and one night you pick up a drunk drifter, right? There's just a drunk drifter floating through town, and you pick him up and you put him in the drunk tank. And the next morning you wake up and there's a giant angry mob in front of the sheriff's station. It turns out that the night before, one of the prominent men in town, his house was broken into, and his son was murdered. Now, with certainty that the drifter wasn't the person that murdered the angry, the important man's son, because he was, the drifter was in the prison cell the whole night, the drunk tank. But the angry mob, they think that the important man's rival, another important man in town, has probably perpetrated this murder, and the angry mob is going to go and destroy half the town in order to bring what they think of as vigilante justice to this other man that may or may not have caused this murder, or had done this murder. And so you, as the sheriff of the town, know all of this, and you think to yourself, well, you know what I could do? I could frame this drifter that's in the prison cell, that's in the drunk tank. I could frame him for the murder, and that would, that would stop the angry mob from, destroying half the town. That would stop the angry mob from going out and, killing a bunch of other random innocent bystander type people, right? That would stop, a mini war from breaking out in this old, Wild West town. Well, in that case, should the sheriff frame the drifter? Well, according to utilitarianism, yes, because if he frames the drifter, it'll be one person's happiness versus many people's happiness. He will be minimizing the unhappiness that will come from the situation. But it seems wrong to frame someone. It seems wrong to lie about what's going on in this situation. And it seems like, something immoral would be going on if the sheriff did this thing to the drifter that's in the drunk tank. And so the issue here is, if Act Utilitarianism is true, then Act Utilitarianism tells the sheriff in the angry mob case to frame the drifter. But that seems morally problematic. That seems to get our intuitions wrong with respect to morality. All right. There's more issues with indirect utilitarianism, but I don't think I'm going to discuss them now. I do, however, want to leave you with one thing that I do think is sort of, utilitarianism is still a good contemporary ethical view that lots of people hold. And it's the more contemporary versions work like this. Contemporary utilitarians take a two-leveled approach. They think basic human rights exist, and so they postulate the existence of these rights as fundamental to human interaction. They think that the utilitarian calculus of deciding whether or not something is going to maximize happiness can't run afoul of basic human rights. So at the very basis of morality, we've got basic human rights. But then when it comes to making decisions above basic human rights, when it comes to making decisions that don't conflict with basic human rights, we ought to try to maximize happiness whenever possible. And that morality basically does come down beyond basic human rights to issues of how we can make the most people the most well off. In a certain way, then, this, I think, is a good view for how governments should operate, right? Governments should operate in ways where they don't violate basic human rights. And as long as they're not violating basic human rights, what they ought to be doing is attempting to, make it so that the most people in the country are the most well off. If that involves maybe redistribution of wealth sometimes, or just helping out people that are down in certain ways, protecting people, making sure there's, basic utilities, things like that. Those kinds of things are what governments should be doing, and those kinds of the decisions that governments can and should be making should be taking kind of utilitarian considerations into account, I think. All right, that ends this part of the lecture on the problems for utilitarianism and consequentialism in general. If anybody wishes, we can discuss these problems further in the discussion board, the ethics discussion board, or at office hours.